On a warm spring evening in Florida, 62-year-old Beverly Marks slipped out of her wedding dress and into a silk robe, just 6 hours after saying, "I do." What should have been the happiest night of her new life became her last. By morning, her body was found bloodied and lifeless inside a luxury beachfront hotel suite. There were no signs of forced entry, no sounds of struggle reported by neighbors. Just silence, and a room that had been wiped down too carefully. The man she married, a self-proclaimed reformed preacher, had vanished. So had another woman staying just 3 doors down. But it wasn't until a random iPad notification synced to Beverly's cloud that investigators unraveled a horrifying truth. This wasn't a honeymoon. It was a setup. And what they discovered would expose a dark partnership, a forged identity, and a murder carried out with unholy precision. Welcome to True Crimes Corner, where justice meets darkness. Share this story and subscribe if you believe evil should never wear a wedding ring. Let's bring the truth to light. One story at a time. Beverly Marks had always lived by routine. A retired insurance auditor in Pensacola, Florida, she filled her time volunteering at a prison ministry and attending local church events. Widowed and childless, her days were quiet, her evenings quieter. Neighbors described her as warm, meticulous, and deeply spiritual. Her home was pristine, her habits structured. After nearly 4 years of solitude, she began to entertain the idea of companionship again. It wasn't desperation, it was longing for conversation, shared meals, maybe even love. She met Terrence Rowan at a prison outreach event in early January 2023. He had just been released from a 19-year sentence for armed robbery and attempted homicide. Beverly didn't know the full details at first. Terrence introduced himself as a man reborn, someone who had used his time behind bars to reconnect with God and earn his credentials to preach. He was 44, articulate, charismatic. He told stories of redemption, spoke softly, and held eye contact just long enough to build trust. She found him compelling. He found her useful. Within weeks, their conversations deepened. They exchanged numbers, began meeting privately for prayer sessions and community planning. To Beverly's circle, it appeared innocent. A Christian woman investing in someone who had turned their life around. But those who knew Terrence from prison painted a different picture. He'd served time mostly in protective custody, after allegedly informing on another inmate. His release had not been celebrated. In fact, one parole officer described him as the kind of man who can convince the sky it's green if he needs to. By late February, Beverly and Terrence were officially dating. It moved fast. Friends noted that she started dressing differently, smiling more, skipping her usual bridge nights. She talked about him constantly when she revealed their engagement in March. Eyebrows raised, but Beverly insisted it was God's plan. She said she had prayed for clarity, and Terrence had been sent as an answer. What she didn't know was that Terrence had been living a double life. Behind the scenes, he was maintaining contact with a woman named Kendra Morgan, a 42-year-old former nurse. Kendra had a background of her own, 2 aliases, a suspended license, and a trail of unpaid debts. She was also very much part of Terrence's plan. Together, they saw Beverly as a solution, stable, wealthy, and trusting. Beverly had no children, no close relatives nearby, and had just updated her life insurance policy. The plan was already forming, and the first step had just been completed. Terrence had moved into her home. They were getting married, and Kendra was already working under a new name just a few blocks away. Long before Terrence Rowan stood at an altar in Pensacola, claiming to be a changed man, his life had been marked by violence, manipulation, and deception. Born in 1978 in Shreveport, Louisiana, he spent most of his youth drifting between relatives and juvenile detention centers. His mother struggled with addiction. His father was absent. By 14, Terrence had been arrested for assault, and by 19, he was serving a sentence for armed robbery after holding a convenience store clerk at gunpoint during a failed heist. It wasn't his only crime, but it was the one that landed him behind bars for nearly 2 decades. During his incarceration, Terrence completed a GED, enrolled in theology courses offered through correspondence programs, and built a portfolio of good behavior that would later be used to persuade parole boards. But those who shared cell blocks with him said he never changed. According to one former inmate, Terrence played the long game, often aligning himself with religious groups in prison not for spiritual reasons, but because it granted him protection and access to people he could manipulate. It was during one of those faith-based workshops that he met Kendra Morgan. At the time, she had been working as a prison nurse in a contracted facility just outside Baton Rouge. Their initial communication was limited, but after her resignation over a separate ethics complaint, she began writing to Terrence regularly. What started as casual letters evolved into long-term correspondence and eventually a shared goal, starting over together by any means necessary. When Terrence was granted parole in late 2022, he relocated to Florida, listed Pensacola as his new residence, and was approved for housing through a transitional program affiliated with a church Beverly volunteered at. He used this as his introduction to her, knowing that his position within the community would give him the credibility she needed to trust him. To those watching from afar, Terrence presented as a reformed man, but privately he was reestablishing contact with Kendra, who had relocated to Gulf Breeze under the alias Monique Lyle. She found work as a private home aide and secured a small apartment in a complex not far from Beverly's home. The two saw each other regularly, often communicating through encrypted messaging apps and burner phones. In early March, financial activity began to reflect their growing plans. Terrence applied for access to Beverly's accounts to help manage wedding expenses, and she agreed. He began transferring small amounts to a separate account listed under a fake nonprofit. Meanwhile, Kendra opened a new joint savings account under her alias and began purchasing supplies: hair dye, gloves, prepaid phones, and an untraceable burner laptop. Their scheme wasn't just about money. It was about control. It was about eliminating any possibility of long-term accountability. And if things went right, Beverly wouldn't be around long enough to notice. By mid-March 2023, the pace of Beverly Mark's new relationship had reached speeds that alarmed even her closest friends. Just 8 weeks after meeting Terrence Rowan, she was engaged, but her close friends had concerns. One friend later told investigators that Beverly had started avoiding more cautious voices, insisting that God's plan doesn't always make sense to man. Terrence, for his part, knew how to push the narrative. He showed up to Beverly's volunteer events. He posted vague spiritual captions about second chances and soulmates. He accompanied her on errands, sat beside her during Sunday services, and quickly became a fixture in her life. But behind the romantic front there were red flags, subtle but persistent. He never seemed to have his own transportation. Beverly drove him everywhere. When asked about employment, he spoke vaguely about starting a ministry, yet produced no documents, plans, or affiliations. His finances were non-existent. Still, within 2 weeks of their engagement, he was added as a co-signer on Beverly's checking account. As wedding preparations began, Beverly took the lead. She rented a modest chapel, found an off-the-rack dress, and printed invitations using an at-home kit. The guest list was short. No extended relatives, no co-workers, only a few people from the church and some neighbors. Terrence said most of his family was out of state or estranged. Beverly accepted the explanation, but one person did appear from his past, a woman he introduced as his cousin. She called herself Monique. Soft-spoken, helpful, and unassuming, she attended 2 church services with them and was seen helping Beverly organize wedding decorations the week before the ceremony. No one thought to question her presence. She seemed friendly. She seemed harmless. Monique was Kendra Morgan. Despite whispers in the community, Beverly pushed forward. She told one friend she felt seen for the first time in years. She believed Terrence when he said he had changed. She believed he loved her. And with the wedding just days away, there was no turning back. She had already sent the final deposit for the chapel. The dress had been altered, and the man standing beside her had already started referring to himself as Pastor T. Saturday, April 15th, 2023, began with sunshine and silence across the small chapel on Pine Grove Lane. Beverly's wedding was scheduled for 3 p.m. The guest list barely reached 20, and half were from her Bible study group. There were no professional photographers, just a church volunteer with a camera, snapping pictures in between arranging chairs. Observers later described the atmosphere as polite, but strained. Beverly smiled for every photo, greeted each guest warmly, and kept a brave front. But behind that smile, something felt off. Her best friend, Sheila Daves, later admitted that Beverly seemed detached, almost like she was running on autopilot. By 5:30 p.m., the event had ended. Beverly left with Terrence in her silver SUV. They were headed to the Gulf Breeze Resort Hotel, located just 15 minutes from the chapel, where Terrence had booked a honeymoon suite overlooking the beach. Security camera footage from the hotel captured them arriving around 5:52 p.m. Terrence exited the driver's side and casually walked around to open Beverly's door. She stepped out slowly, holding her wedding dress with one hand and a tote bag in the other. The clerk later told investigators that Beverly didn't say a word during check-in. She stood behind her new husband, looking tired. Meanwhile, Beverly's iPad had been synced to her iCloud account and still logged into her email and notes app. The device would later provide investigators with a digital window into her final days, including unsent messages, private journal entries, and a voice memo saved just a week before the wedding. At the time, no one thought anything of it, but that small oversight would soon speak louder than anything Beverly said that night. Because by the time Sunday morning arrived, she was gone. Surveillance footage from the Gulf Breeze Hotel showed no activity at the door of room 308 between 6:10 p.m. and 9:40 p.m. But according to forensic timestamps and hotel keycard logs, several events were unfolding behind that closed door, and none of them involved a peaceful honeymoon. Shortly after check-in, Beverly had changed into a soft cotton robe Terrence presented to her. The robe was folded inside a small white gift bag, labeled, "Relax, my bride." According to items later recovered from the room, a handwritten note had been included, inviting her to enjoy a surprise spa moment before dinner. The room had been dimly lit, candles placed around the edges of the suite, and low music playing through a portable speaker. It was meant to feel soothing, romantic, intentional. But evidence suggests Beverly never sat down to enjoy any of it. At approximately 8:47 p.m., the secondary keycard registered a second entry. The woman who stepped inside, caught briefly on a motion-triggered hallway camera, was wearing a hoodie and baseball cap. Her name was Kendra Morgan, still posing as Terrence's cousin. There were no signs of forced entry. According to investigators, she entered quietly and moved directly into the suite. Beverly's Apple Watch later recorded a sharp spike in her heart rate within 2 minutes of Kendra's arrival. It's unclear whether Beverly had been suspicious or caught entirely off guard. But what is clear is that she resisted. Forensics found signs of a violent struggle near the edge of the bed and down the narrow hallway leading toward the bathroom. DNA evidence confirmed that Beverly managed to scratch one of her attackers deeply, believed to be Kendra, leaving tissue embedded under her fingernails. During the struggle, Beverly also triggered an alert on her Apple Watch by pressing and holding the side button, a feature that sent a silent SOS. The alert pinged her emergency contact, her cousin, but the notification wasn't seen until hours later. At the time, no one realized what it meant. What happened next was brutal. Beverly sustained 17 stab wounds, most concentrated on her upper chest and neck. The attack was frenzied but precise. Medical examiners later determined that the fatal wound had been a deep slash across the carotid artery, delivered with force, and likely by someone standing directly over her. The murder weapon was later recovered, a thin blade concealed within a hollowed-out Bible cover. It had been placed on the nightstand prior to the attack. The Bible itself had pages glued shut, making the weapon almost undetectable unless opened carefully. No hotel staff reported hearing anything. There were no screams, no calls from neighboring rooms. When the assault ended, Beverly lay lifeless on the hotel carpet, her Apple Watch still blinking. Her honeymoon had lasted just over 6 hours. In the aftermath of Beverly's death, what followed was not a panicked escape, but a calculated attempt to stage the scene. Forensic evidence later pieced together a timeline showing that, instead of leaving the hotel immediately, Terrence and Kendra remained inside the suite for nearly an hour. Their first move was to remove Beverly's robe. It was found days later inside a dumpster behind the hotel, stuffed into a garbage bag along with a bloodied towel and disposable gloves. The robe had been sliced down the back, presumably in haste, its fabric soaked through. They then attempted to clean the room. Hotel cleaning supplies had not been requested, but several hand towels were missing from the bathroom, and traces of diluted blood were found in the sink. The most disturbing detail came in their effort to redress the body. Investigators believe Beverly was placed back into her wedding dress, which had been folded neatly on a chair near the closet. The dress was pulled over her body and zipped part way, with a portion of the lining torn. Her hair was brushed and arranged. Stray strands found in the sink matched both her and Kendra's DNA. She was then laid on the bed, covered with the hotel comforter. But despite the effort, the scene couldn't be contained. Around 11:15 p.m., the guests in room 208, directly below Beverly's suite, called the front desk to report a persistent dripping sound. They believed it was a plumbing issue. A night manager was dispatched and entered their room, where she noticed water staining the ceiling directly above the bed. But it wasn't water. It was blood. Meanwhile, across town, one of Beverly's closest friends, LaToya Freeman, was growing concerned. She hadn't heard from Beverly since earlier that afternoon, and several texts had gone unanswered. Around 11:30 p.m., she remembered something. Beverly had left her iPad synced and unlocked at home, and it often received notifications when bank activity occurred. Out of curiosity, LaToya tapped the banking app. It showed a new login had been made, not from Beverly's usual device. There was a small transfer, less than $500, to an unfamiliar account. The access was logged from a location tied to the Gulf Breeze Hotel. Alarmed, LaToya called Beverly's phone. It rang but went unanswered. She tried again, then called the hotel directly. She asked if someone could check on Beverly. The hotel receptionist, aware of the earlier ceiling complaint, decided not to wait. At 11:51 p.m., staff called 911. Emergency services arrived within 7 minutes. Officers entered room 308 with hotel security, forcing the door open after repeated knocks went unanswered. Inside, they found Beverly, unresponsive, cold, and staged. The wedding dress was blood-stained from the inside, and the room below still dripped. By the time detectives arrived at the Gulf Breeze Hotel the following morning, the scent of bleach still clung to the air in room 308. The initial responders had secured the scene overnight, but the full forensic sweep began just after 9 a.m., when the department's crime scene unit entered with specialized equipment and documentation tools. The suite told a contradictory story, visually cleaned, but unmistakably violent. Blood residue was discovered beneath the edge of the mattress, pooled deeper than what had initially soaked through. One corner of the fitted sheet had been hastily flipped, a telltale sign of attempted staging. Under blacklight, transfer patterns on the bathroom floor, aligned with drag marks and partial footprints, later matched to 2 separate shoe sizes. But the most significant discovery was inside the wall. During the sweep, one investigator noticed Beverly's phone was missing. It had not been recovered from her purse, dress, or personal effects. A handheld thermal imager used near the ventilation system picked up faint residual heat, enough to prompt removal of a vent cover above the suite's writing desk. Inside, wrapped in a hotel washcloth, was Beverly's iPhone. The phone was still powered on and had remained connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi all night. Investigators would later learn that several of her apps, including her calendar and iMessage, had been accessed around midnight. They also confirmed a location ping, placing the phone in that room hours after Terrence and Kendra had claimed to have checked out. It wasn't just the phone that helped build the timeline. Beverly's iPad, still active at home, had been syncing with her cloud accounts. When the forensic team pulled data from it, they found location logs, partial message drafts, and banking alerts that tied Terrence to the room long after the time he told police he had gone home after dropping her off. The security team at the Gulf Breeze Hotel handed over 14 hours of surveillance footage. On it, Terrence was clearly seen using a credit card with a different name, later confirmed as an alias he had used before. By noon that same day, an all-points bulletin was issued for Terrence and a woman identified as Kendra Morgan. But they were already gone. Hours earlier, they had switched vehicles with the help of a man known only as T-Rel, a former inmate Terrence had mentored during his short-lived prison ministry. Witnesses recalled seeing a red Honda Civic parked near the service entrance of the hotel shortly before 4 a.m. The Civic was gone before sunrise, and so were they. 2 days after Beverly's body was discovered, Terrence and Kendra were located 187 miles west of the Gulf Breeze Hotel. Just outside New Orleans, at a 24-hour gas station off Interstate 10, they attempted a cash withdrawal using a fake ID and prepaid debit card. The plan was simple: retrieve a quick sum from a compromised account before disappearing again. What they didn't know was that Terrence's face had already been distributed across interstate law enforcement networks, tied to an active murder investigation. A store clerk, who recognized him from a local news update running in the background just hours before, quietly alerted a state trooper refueling nearby. By the time they reached the parking lot, Terrence and Kendra were already being approached by 2 plainclothes officers. The vehicle, registered under a now-deceased man's name, had been parked awkwardly across 2 spots, drawing more attention than they intended. When asked for identification, Terrence handed over a Louisiana ID bearing the name Marcus Ellison. The officer noted the grainy laminate and mismatched details. Kendra, visibly shaken, fumbled her response when asked where they were headed. She said they were on their honeymoon. That triggered the arrest. Inside the gas station restroom, officers found a discarded wig, a roll of cash in a sanitary napkin wrapper, and a makeup bag filled with prepaid gift cards. The red Honda Civic used during their initial escape was impounded that same morning. Inside the glove box were 2 burner phones, both wiped clean. Once booked, they were held separately. Terence exercised his right to remain silent. Kendra did not. After less than 6 hours in custody, she began to unravel. Faced with charges of accessory to murder, obstruction, and flight from prosecution, she agreed to cooperate. According to reports, she provided a full account of what happened inside room 308, from the planning to the attack to the staged cleanup. Her statement included details about the concealed blade inside a hollowed Bible cover, later recovered from a trash bin near the hotel. She also confirmed that the marriage had been a setup. Beverly's wealth, the rushed timeline, the manipulation, everything. Investigators described her demeanor as emotionally erratic, but forthcoming. She wept during parts of the interview, especially when recounting Beverly's final moments. Her statement was later corroborated by physical evidence, including surveillance footage and the recovered hotel items. Terence, meanwhile, gave nothing. He declined all questions, refused to acknowledge the warrant for his arrest, and stared blankly through each attempt to extract information. But Kendra's words were already enough. The confession sealed the narrative, and in the eyes of investigators, justice was now moving forward. The trial of Terence and Kendra began in early May 2023, just 6 months after the events at Gulf Breeze Hotel. Kendra Morgan was the first to take the stand. In a controlled but emotion-laced testimony, she walked the jury through the story behind the story. She explained how she met Terence through prison outreach work, where he once led weekly devotionals under a ministry program. After his release, she said, they remained in contact. Their relationship shifted when he proposed an opportunity that involved infiltrating the life of a wealthy widow he had connected with through church. Kendra claimed that from the beginning, the objective was financial. Terence, she said, believed marrying Beverly would be quick, clean, and profitable. He would use charm, redemption language, and Beverly's desire for companionship to win her over. Once married, he would gain access to her assets, property, savings, and life insurance. Kendra's role initially was minor, helping him set up background details, hiding his identity shifts, and posing as his relative. But the plan escalated. As Kendra testified, the courtroom sat silent. More than once, jurors were seen glancing toward Terence as Kendra described Beverly's final moments. He didn't blink. Throughout the proceedings, Terence showed no emotion, no flinch during the autopsy review, no visible response to Kendra's breakdown on the witness stand. The prosecution later described him as a man whose silence roared louder than any testimony. On the final day, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Terence Rowan was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and identity fraud. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no reaction, no visible remorse, no comment. Kendra Morgan, under the terms of her plea agreement, received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy and covering up the crime. She would be eligible for parole after serving 18. The sentencing judge made a rare comment during closing. This was not just the murder of a woman, he said. It was the calculated erasure of a life, a manipulation of trust, and the cold exploitation of faith. For the community Beverly left behind, the verdict brought some measure of closure. But the betrayal would not be forgotten. The final chapter of the case against Terence and Kendra Morgan was not written in a courtroom, but in the silence left behind. Beverly's longtime friend and church secretary, Marcia Delaney, described the atmosphere as haunted. Services continued, but her seat remained empty. The front pew, once occupied by a woman known for leading prayer circles and organizing food drives, was now marked only by flowers and silence. The crime's proximity to faith and the shocking weaponization of love and trust turned it into more than a murder case. It became a warning. In the digital age, where every device stores footprints, justice found its way through signals and syncs. The silent pings of Beverly's iPad, left connected to her financial accounts, revealed movement when she no longer could. Her Apple Watch, once worn for tracking steps and texts, sent out the distress signal no one heard, until it was too late. But it wasn't technology that failed her. It was people. Beverly's death sparked urgent conversations about vulnerability, late-life romance, and the dangers of ignoring gut instinct. Her friends described her as smart, independent, but emotionally lonely. The whirlwind courtship that had seemed romantic to some now appeared as clear manipulation in hindsight. In the end, this was not just the story of a woman murdered for her money. It was a story about the masks predators wear, sometimes dressed in faith, other times in love. The photographs from her wedding day, once printed in small glossy albums, are now locked away by her family. What should have been the happiest night of her life became the last. Her story stands as a sobering reminder. Sometimes evil isn't loud. It whispers scripture, offers affection, and promises happily ever after. If this case moved you, don't let Beverly's story fade in silence. Share it. Talk about it. Warn someone you love. And if you believe in exposing evil hiding in plain sight, subscribe to True Crime's Corner. Because here, every case is a lesson, and every voice matters.